So now that we have that sketch made and it's time to start sculpting it, we're going to use a polymer-based clay, rather an air-dry clay through Crayola. They make this product. It doesn't require any baking. It dries on its own, and you can paint it. It dries pretty hard. So I think I got this 2.5 pounder for maybe $5.50 at Walmart. So they usually keep it in stock. If you have the opportunity to use like earthenware clay or clay that you would fire, that's the best experience for kids, really. But in order to adapt this to where you guys could actually make the project, I try to use something like this. I'll also include a recipe for how to make this at home. You can make it with just regular household stuff, like flour, salt, that kind of thing. And so we actually use this quite a bit in my drawing class to sculpt out the figures that we're going to be drawing. And so it works out pretty well. What I do is I start with 2 equal size spheres like this of air dry clay, and I try to make a pinch pot out of each. And so I just grabbed some and rolled it around until it looked like it was a good amount. And so what I'm doing is I'm pinching and I'm moving it in my hands. I have my fingers like this together, and I'm using my thumbs to sort of develop the shape. And I want to try to keep the wall of this fairly thick. So I'm doing this the way I would do it with earthenware clay. And so I'm just sort of thinking about making like a hemisphere of a globe type scenario. What I like to do is add armature elements, meaning like stuff to go inside of here, so it's not all 100% clay. It takes too long to dry. It dries a lot faster if you use other stuff. And so I'll have students wad up newspaper, or we'll use paper towels and we'll stick it inside like this, and that can kind of help absorb some of the moisture. And so I'll get the other one ready. So what I want to do now, take that other sphere and do the same thing. I want to press in the middle, turn, press, turn, press, turn. This is going to be harder for younger kids to do. Pinch pots, though, are probably one of the most fundamental clay skills for kids. I've had kids as young as 2nd grade, 1st grade, able to make pretty good pinch pots if you just slow them down, really show them the process, and make sure that they're doing it right. Okay, so I've got a pretty good sized pinch pot. I want to make sure they're about the same size, and they are. So I think I'm ready to attach them now to create my sphere. So the way I designed this project was to replicate what we've done here in 2D and 3D as much as possible. So we start with the sphere just like we start with the circle in this. So I like to use wooden tools on this stuff. If you have plastic tools, great. I'm just using a skewer and a popsicle stick. I've sharpened one side and I keep one side smooth for blending. So I'll take one of the sharp tools and I'm just going to scratch the edge, because I want to be able to join these 2 pieces of clay together. And the way that you join clay together is by adding water and clay to 2 texturized surfaces. So it has to be pretty textural. And so you can see that I'm really focusing on roughing that surface up, and I'm holding it in my hand pretty carefully to make sure I don't mess up the form as I do that. What I'm gonna do is just take a little bit of water and a brush. If you were using like earthenware clay, you would want to make slip, which is about 50% water, 50% clay, blended up into kind of a milkshakey type consistency. And so in this case, you can just get away with like straight water, because it behaves similarly to slip with this air dry clay. And so while that's kind of sitting in there and moisturizing, I'm going to scratch the other side. If you do make your own recipe for this air dry clay at home, you want to make sure it's pretty stiff. A lot of times I've made that stuff and it ends up really loose. It's hard to work with. So a lot of times you have to add like extra flour to it to get it to stiffen up a little bit. Okay, so now that I have those 2 elements scratched, now I'm just going to place them together, and I'm going to push and turn. And when I do this, I always tell the students to make sure that they squeeze that seam with their thumbs like this. And that paper inside is also going to help keep the kids from collapsing the form. Sometimes kids do that. So, you know, I explain, be gentle. But this is where the kids really understand the whole human facial proportioning thing. What I do at that point is I just take my smooth blendy tool and I go over that seam. And the goal is to try to make it look like there's no seam at all. And then I always work over newspaper just because I don't like to have to clean up clay off the desks. If I can fold this up and just get rid of it that way. Plus, having something to work over helps you when you need to like regularize your shape. So what I'm doing now is I'm working to kind of dry off some of that water. And I also want to turn it into a pretty good looking sphere. So I've taken those two spheres now and I have a big hollow sphere. So just like when we started with the portrait before, what we want to do now is think, okay, well, how do I take this frontal portrait with the circle and then add that jawline on there? I could add clay, but why not just change the shape? So what I do is I squeeze it more on one side than another, and I work it in my hands until I have what I feel like is an upside down egg shape that sort of resembles the shape that I have here. And so I usually break this process up into about 2 or 3 days for the kids because where I taught we had shorter class periods, so we really weren't able to get all this done in one class period. So at this point I tell them, now it's time to start drawing the symmetry lines. And so we'll use this tool right here, and we're just gonna sketch a line that goes all the way around the head. We wanna make sure that it divides the head in half as best we can. Hopefully you can see that pretty well. And I tell them not to scratch all the way in. So then when looking at that, I also want to scratch a line about halfway between the top of the head, bottom of the chin for the eye line, or the brow line depending, and then about halfway between here and here, just like when we were drawing before, we want to sketch in a line where the nose ought to go and the mouth ought to go. So now we can start to look at it frontal, we can look at it profile, we can look at it 3/4, and any of those ways we should be able to compare it with our drawing and then customize the sculpture so that it looks like this. Before I go any further, what I usually do is I have the kids kind of line up where they think the eyes would go, and I have them take their thumbs and they kind of create a depression. They push in a little bit, like this. And then I ask them to kind of reshape the face if they need to, but it really kind of helps them see like the shadows in here so that they understand how a brow line out here would exist. So I might take it on the side and start to sculpt a little bit there. At this point, I'm ready to really start adding clay, and so I'm gonna do a couple little demos on how to make eyes, nose, mouth, that kind of thing, and then I'm gonna customize this thing and dry it out. So this is how we start the sculpture base for now, and so I'm gonna start working on those other elements here shortly.